You always knew when Carson was coming, not because you saw him, but because you felt him. Hey there, and welcome to Mama, Drama, and Trauma. I'm your host, Jenny Kimmel. And today we're talking about the kind of child who doesn't just enter a room, they change it. You always knew when Carson was coming, not because you saw him, but because you felt him. The loud footsteps, the energy, that youngest child presence that just filled up the space. It was like the house shifted the second he walked in. And I don't know if every family has one of these, but in ours, Carson was the spark. He was the one who brought the noise, the movement, the laughter, and honestly, the life. Even from the very beginning, there was just something about him. He didn't walk into the world quietly. He came in with energy. And as he grew, that didn't change. He marched to the beat of his own drum. He saw the world in his own way. And he had this creativity, this imagination, this way of telling stories that made you stop and listen, even if you weren't quite sure where the story was going. And the thing about Carson is people are drawn to him. Kids, adults, it doesn't matter. There's something about his energy that makes people feel good. Like joy just follows him around. In some of the hardest moments of my life, that kind of energy, that kind of light, it mattered more than I can even put into words. This episode is about Carson, the one who walked in with joy, the one who reminded me that even in the middle of everything falling apart, there was still laughter in my home. There was still movement. There was still life. And sometimes that was enough to get me through the day. Here comes Carson. You always knew when Carson was coming. You didn't have to see him. You didn't even have to hear his voice yet. You just knew. It was the footsteps, loud, fast, heavy, constant movement, like there was no such thing as quietly walking into a room for him. It was always, here I am. And even when they were little, I always knew. Ryan and Derek had their own way of coming in. But Carson had what I used to call his Fred Flintstone feet. And he will probably kill me for saying that. But it's true. They were just loud, flat, heavy little steps. And I could be anywhere in the house and I'd hear it and instantly think, here comes Carson. And even his dad and I would say it out loud. If we heard those footsteps coming down the stairs, one of us would look at the other and just say, here comes Carson. Because there was no mistaking it. That was him. And honestly, that's just who he's always been. Everything about Carson is loud, not in a bad way, just in a him way. It's his energy, his presence, the way he moves through the world. He doesn't walk into a room quietly. He feels it. You can feel the energy change the second he comes in. And I remember thinking, even back then, this kid is different. Not in a bad way, just in his own way. Like he came into this world already knowing he wasn't going to do things like everybody else. He never has. There was no easing into anything with Carson, no quiet entrances, no standing off to the side. It was always full energy, full personality, full presence. But what's funny is when I think back to him as a baby, he was the complete opposite. He was actually the easiest baby. And I don't even know how that happened because when Carson was born, Ryan and Derek were only 15 months old. So my life at that time was chaos. I had twins who were barely walking, barely talking, and then a newborn. And I remember our kitchen was set up in an L shape with an island in the middle, and it actually worked out perfectly because I would put a baby gate up in that L so the twins couldn't get to him. Not because they meant harm, but they were 15 months old. They didn't know any better. So I would keep Carson on my side of the gate with me. I'd have him in his car seat or his little bouncy seat right there where I could see him while I was doing dishes, washing bottles, making lunch, making dinner, just trying to get through the day. And the twins would come up to the gate and look at him and talk to him, and he would just lay there, watching everything, taking it all in. And Carson, he was just good. He didn't fuss, he didn't cry, he didn't throw fits. He would just lay there, content. I think he knew. I really do. I think he knew what I was carrying in that season because he slept through the night so early, like 6 to 8 weeks old. And I've said this before, I don't think that was just luck. I think that was survival because I don't know how I would have made it if he didn't. I was already barely holding it together with two 15-month-olds and a newborn. So for him to just sleep, be calm, be easy, it felt like he gave me exactly what I needed in that moment. He was my good baby, my calm baby, my watch the world baby, but boy, did he make up for it later. Because as he grew, that quiet baby turned into the loudest presence in the house. The footsteps, the energy, the movement, the personality, it all came out. And that's when you really started to see this is Carson, the one you always hear coming, the one who brings movement into the stillness. And even now, nothing's really changed. He still comes barreling through the house, still comes down the stairs where you can hear every step. And I can still tell it's him without even looking. Ryan skips steps. Derek is quiet, almost sneaks in. But Carson arrives. And honestly, I don't think our home would have ever felt the same without that energy in it. He was never meant to blend in. As Carson got older, it became really clear, really fast. He was never meant to blend in. And I think as moms, we see that early. We start to notice which kids follow the crowd and which ones don't even see the crowd. And Carson, he's always been that kid, the one who just does things his own way. Not because he's trying to be different, but because that's just who he is. He doesn't think like everyone else. He doesn't move like everyone else. He doesn't see the world the same way. I think that's one of the most special things about him because there's a confidence in that. Even when he was little, he just kind of marched to the beat of his own drum. He didn't need to fit in. He didn't need to follow. He just was Carson. And I remember when he was in Taekwondo, this is something that always stuck with me. His instructor saw it too. That same thing I saw in him, that individuality, that creativity, that different way of moving and thinking, his instructor noticed it. And instead of trying to tone it down or make him more like everybody else, she appreciated it. She saw it as something special. So did everybody else, because Carson never struggled to fit in. Not ever. Kids were just naturally drawn to him. And that's something I noticed really early on, because it wasn't the same with all my boys. There was just something about Carson. People wanted to be around him. Kids wanted to be his friend without him even trying. He wasn't forcing it. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress people. He was just Carson. And somehow that energy pulled people in. I think people could feel that he was genuine, comfortable in his own skin, completely himself. That kind of confidence is magnetic. Even as a little kid, there's just this joy about him, this energy, this lightness. And when Carson walks into a room, people feel it. They always have, because Carson doesn't need to be like everyone else. He's not supposed to be. He's creative. He's hands-on. He's always doing something, building something, thinking of something, moving from one idea to the next. And sometimes it's a lot. I'm not even going to pretend it's not. Because when you have that kind of energy in one person, it can feel like chaos. But it's also where the magic is, because that's the same kid who walks into a room and makes people laugh. The same kid who connects with people so easily. The same kid that other kids are drawn to without even knowing why. And I think a big part of that is because he's just so fully himself. There's no pretending, no trying to be something he's not. He just shows up exactly as he is. And that kind of authenticity, you can't teach that. That's just who he's always been. And as he's grown, that hasn't changed. If anything, it's gotten stronger. And I think as his mom, my role was never to shape him into something else. It was to let him be exactly who he already was, to guide him, but not shrink him, to support him, but not quiet him. Because the very things that make him loud and different and full of energy, those are the same things that are going to take him far in life. And I think that's something I've had to learn too. Not every kid is meant to fit into the same mold. Some kids are meant to break it. And Carson has always been one of those kids. The storyteller. Carson has always been a storyteller, and I don't mean just telling stories, I mean fully committing to them. Like the kind of kid who says something with so much confidence, people actually believe him. That's part of what made him so funny. Because Carson didn't just tell stories for attention, he genuinely lived inside his imagination. And half the time, you didn't even know where the stories came from. I remember one time we were at his younger cousin's birthday party, and one of his older cousins, who was probably about 11 years older than Carson, came up to me laughing. And he said, "Carson just told me you guys had a fish living in the toilet in the basement." And apparently, Carson had fully convinced him, like completely. He told this whole story about how there was a fish living in the basement toilet, and he said, "I didn't know about it, and one day I came downstairs and flushed the toilet and accidentally flushed the fish away because I didn't know it was in there." And the funniest part is, I never even heard the full story myself. I just got pieces of it afterward from his cousin, who fully believed Carson while he was telling it. And I just remember thinking, of course he did. That is such a Carson story, because that's who he's always been. Creative, imaginative, completely committed, and somehow convincing enough that people just went along with it. That happened a lot with him. Like the fish egg story. For a couple days, there were these orange Orbeez sitting on a little piece of tissue on the bathroom sink in our half bath. And I kept seeing them every time I went in there thinking, why are these Orbeez sitting here? Like somebody needs to do something with these. And finally, one day I asked Derek about them. I said, "What are these Orbeez doing in here?" And Derek looked at me confused and said, Orbeez? Carson said those were fish eggs. And I just started laughing because apparently Carson had convinced Derek they were fish eggs, and Derek fully believed him. I didn't even think about the fact that they did kind of look like fish eggs until that moment. But Carson had already created the story. And once the story existed, everybody just accepted it. That's just who he's always been. He sees things differently. Ordinary things become stories, little moments become adventures. And honestly, the storytelling and scheming started early with Carson. I remember one time when the boys were still pretty little, we were all playing the game Headbands together during family game night. All 5 of us were sitting there playing, and Carson suddenly says, "I have to go to the bathroom." And we're like, okay. So he goes to the bathroom, comes back out, and it's his turn. We start giving him clues for what's on his card, and somehow he guesses it really fast. And we're all cheering him on like, oh my gosh, good job, Carson. And then not long after that, he says again, "I have to go to the bathroom." And at that point, we were like, wait a minute, you just went to the bathroom. There's no way you have to go again already. And that's when we figured out he was going into the bathroom and jumping up to look in the mirror because he wasn't even tall enough yet, trying to see what was on his headbands card. He was literally cheating. Once we realized what he was doing, we couldn't even be mad because it was just so Carson. The commitment, the creativity, the determination to win. And somehow he thought he was fully getting away with it too. That same energy followed him everywhere. I remember when we went to Branson one year and did one of those old-time Western photo shoots. The boys and their dad did this poker scene together where they were all sitting around the table with guns pointed at one person because somebody was supposed to be cheating at cards. And the photographer asked, okay, which one of you is the sneaky one? And without even hesitating, everybody immediately pointed at Carson. Every single person. There wasn't even a discussion about it. Like, yep, that's Carson. So in the picture, he's sitting there with his hands up while everybody else has their guns pointed at him. And he's got the hidden cards up his sleeve. It fit him perfectly because Carson has always had this mischievous little personality, but in the funniest, most lovable way. He keeps people laughing, keeps people guessing, and keeps life interesting. Even now, sometimes Carson will tell me something, and I genuinely don't know if he's telling the truth or not. Like, I'll stop and look at him and think, seriously? Is this real? Or are you completely making this up right now? Because he says things with so much confidence and so much detail that sometimes you actually have to investigate it a little before you know whether he's full of it or not. And the funny thing is, even when he's driving you crazy with these stories, you still end up laughing. Like, you want to roll your eyes, you want to say, oh my gosh, Carson, but instead you just kind of chuckle because some of the stuff that comes out of his mouth is so random, so off the wall, so completely unexpected that you can't even help it. And I've had so many moments as his mom where I've just looked at him and thought, who are you, child? Like, where does your brain even come up with this stuff? That imagination, that humor, that ability to create stories and make people laugh, that's part of his magic. That's Carson. And honestly, I've always said Carson is lucky he's cute because he has absolutely always been my handful child. In fact, when he was little, he had this shirt that literally said, I'm a handful. And he was probably only about 1 or 2 years old when he wore it. He has completely lived up to that shirt ever since. Even now, at 17 years old, that shirt still describes him perfectly. The energy, the stories, the chaos, the loud footsteps, the constant movement. He has always kept life interesting, sometimes exhausting, but also so much fun, because even when he's driving you crazy, he somehow still makes you laugh, still makes you smile, still brings joy into the room. And I think that's what makes Carson so special. He's a handful, but he's the kind of handful that makes life feel alive. And our family wouldn't have felt the same without that energy. Not even close. The one people are drawn to. I've always said our family would be so boring without Carson. And I mean that in the best possible way. Because Carson brings something into a room that you can't really explain unless you've experienced it. It's energy, joy, movement, personality, life, and people are naturally drawn to him because of it. That's something I noticed about him really early on. Friendships always came easy for Carson. Kids just wanted to be around him. And it wasn't because he was trying to impress people or trying to fit in or trying to be the center of attention. That's just naturally who he is. People enjoy being around him. They always have. I think part of that is because Carson makes life fun. He brings energy into things. He makes ordinary moments feel more alive. And when you have somebody like that in a family, you feel it. Because every family kind of settles into roles over time. And Carson, he became the spark. The one who brought the noise, the laughter, the unpredictability, the chaos sometimes too, but also so much joy. I think part of why Carson became so tough and so full of personality is because of the family he was born into. Because when Carson was born, Ryan and Derek were only 15 months old. So from the very beginning, he never really saw himself as the younger brother. And Carson never acted younger. Not ever. He always thought he was the same age as them. If they were doing something, he was doing it too. There was never hesitation with him, never fear, never standing back watching first. He just jumped right in. I think having two older brothers that close in age made him tougher early on, because Ryan and Derek were not easy on him. They loved him, but they definitely toughened him up. And somehow Carson just rolled right with it. Like he was determined from the beginning that he was going to keep up no matter what. And he did. He learned how to hold his own really early on. And I think that confidence followed him into everything else in life too. Because even now, there's just something naturally confident about Carson. Not arrogant, not fake confidence, just comfortable. Comfortable being himself. Comfortable talking to people. Comfortable taking up space. And I think people feel that. I think people are drawn to authenticity. And Carson has always been authentically Carson. And what's funny is, for as loud and wild and chaotic as he became as he got older, he was honestly my easiest baby by far. He was my calm baby, my good sleeper, the baby who somehow knew I needed a break. And then somehow that calm little baby grew into the loudest person in the house. And that feels very Carson too, because there's depth to him, there's softness mixed with toughness, there's sweetness mixed with chaos, there's this huge personality, but also this huge heart. And I think that's why people love being around him, because when Carson walks into a room, you feel it. The energy changes, Things get louder, usually crazier, but also happier. And honestly, I think every family needs somebody like that. The person who keeps life from becoming too serious. The person who makes people laugh. The person who brings lightness into heavy moments without even realizing they're doing it. And for our family, that person has always been Carson. To know Carson is to love Carson. That's the best way I can describe him, because once people know him, they just love him. There's something about his energy, his humor, his personality that people are naturally drawn to. And another thing about Carson, he has always been fearless, like truly fearless. Sometimes terrifyingly fearless. I remember one time we were at Elephant Rocks and Carson went to jump from one rock to another without even thinking twice about it. And if one of us hadn't grabbed him and pulled him back, he could have seriously gotten hurt. Because at Elephant Rocks, sometimes there isn't even ground where you think there is. But Carson never stopped to think about any of that. He just saw the jump and went for it. That has always been him. He's never been afraid to jump into something head first. Never been afraid of getting hurt. Never been the cautious one standing back, overthinking things. He just goes. And I think part of that fearlessness came from growing up with older brothers so close in age, because Carson never acted younger than them. Not once. In his mind, he was the same age as Ryan and Derek and could do anything they could do. And he never backed down from that, even when he probably should have. He's always had this stubborn little determination too. I remember when he was probably around 2 years old, there were a couple times where he would just lay down and throw a fit because he didn't want to walk anymore. And one time we were in the store and he laid down again. And I finally said, "Okay, then we're going." And I started walking away with Ryan and Derek. Now, obviously, I wasn't really leaving him behind. I was just trying to show him that we still had to keep going. But Ryan and Derek completely panicked. They were freaking out, saying, "No, Mom, we can't leave Carson." That always stuck with me, because even when they annoyed each other like brothers do, they loved him so deeply. They didn't want their little brother left behind, ever. I think Carson has brought something really special into all of our lives. He's brought laughter, energy, creativity, fearlessness, joy, and even now, as he's growing into a young man, I still see all of that in him. I think sometimes the world doesn't always know what to do with kids who learn differently. Kids who are creative, hands-on, imaginative, kids whose intelligence doesn't always fit neatly into a classroom. And I think over time, that can make even really bright kids question themselves sometimes. But what I hope Carson always knows someday is that intelligence comes in so many forms. And some of the most creative, capable, successful people in the world were never the kids who fit perfectly into a desk all day. Some people are builders, creators, big thinkers, hands-on learners, and that is so much of who Carson has always been. And honestly, I never want him to lose that spark, because the very things that make him different are the exact things that make him unforgettable. The joy he brought into my life. I think during some of the hardest seasons of our lives, Carson was the one who unintentionally broke the tension, even if he didn't mean to. Even if he didn't realize he was doing it. He's just always had this way of saying something so random, so off the wall, that everybody suddenly stops being angry or stressed for a second and just laughs. or at least takes a breath. That mattered more than I think he'll ever realize. Because during really heavy seasons, sometimes laughter is survival. Sometimes one random comment, one ridiculous story, one little moment of joy is enough to break the heaviness for a second. And Carson has always brought that into our family without even trying. Carson has probably taught me patience more than anybody else in my life because he absolutely knows how to push my buttons. He can drive me completely up the wall sometimes, make me so frustrated, so aggravated, and yet there has always been this soft spot in my heart for him. Always. Even when I'm annoyed with him, even when I'm trying not to laugh, he'll say something or do something, and I just end up chuckling and thinking, oh my gosh, this kid. Because that's the thing about Carson. He reminds me not to take life so seriously. I need that. Because if you know me, you know I like structure. Order, consistency, plans, control. I like things organized, predictable. And Carson is basically the complete opposite of me. He's more fly by the seat of your pants, relax, have fun. Life doesn't always have to be so serious. And somehow, through raising him, I think I needed to learn some of that too. Like even now, he'll come into my room and say something completely ridiculous like, my shirt's crinkled. And I'll say, do you mean wrinkled? And he'll say, oh yeah, wrinkled, crinkled, whatever. Or he'll tell me his toenail is dislocated, and I'm just sitting there thinking, what are you even talking about? But somehow those little moments instantly bring life into the house. They make you laugh without even trying to. And I think what Carson has taught me most is this. Life doesn't always have to be so heavy. You can laugh, you can be playful, you can tell stories, you can have imagination, you can make ordinary moments fun. That's a gift. There's also a softer side to Carson that people probably don't see as much now that he's older. But when he was little, he was my cuddler. He loved attention from people he loved being around his grandparents, loved closeness, and I miss that little version of him sometimes. I miss that softer side I used to see all the time when he was little. Because as boys grow up, they change, and I know that's part of life, but sometimes as a mom, you miss the little boy versions of them too. And as I watch Carson becoming a young man, I think what I admire most about him is that he was never meant to fit inside a box. He wasn't born to blend in, he was born to stand out. And I honestly don't think he fully sees that yet. I think sometimes he questions himself more than he should. I think sometimes the world makes creative, imaginative, hands-on kids feel like they're supposed to fit into one specific mold. And Carson was never built for that. He learns differently, thinks differently, sees the world differently, and honestly, I think that's part of what's going to make him incredible someday. There's that Dr. Seuss quote, "Why fit in when you were born to stand out?" And every time I hear that quote, I think of Carson because he wasn't made to be ordinary. He was made to bring something unique into the world. And I hope someday he sees himself the way the people who love him see him, because he's so much more special than he realizes. And if Carson ever listens to this episode someday, I hope he understands how much he impacted my life as his mom. I hope he knows that he brought joy into our family, that he completed our family, and that we needed him. We needed that laughter, that imagination, that fearlessness, that fun, that little reminder not to take life so seriously all the time. He reminded me of something about myself too, because listening to Carson tell stories, watching his imagination, watching the way his mind works, it reminded me that I used to love storytelling too. When I was younger, I loved stories and imagination too. His stories came from creativity and imagination. Mine come from life and experience now, but in a strange way, he reminded me of the younger version of myself that loved storytelling too. And I think that's really beautiful. So if I could say anything directly to Carson, I'd tell him this: you taught me patience. You taught me how to laugh more. You taught me not to take life so seriously. You taught me that joy matters. And even though you test my patience sometimes more than anybody else, you also taught me that it's possible to deeply love someone who is completely different from you. I think I needed that lesson in my life. You were the final piece of our family puzzle, and I will forever be thankful that God gave you to me, because life without Carson would never have been nearly as fun. I think every family has that one person, the one who changes the energy the second they walk into the room, the one who brings noise into the silence, laughter into tension, movement into stillness. For our family, that has always been Carson. And I don't think I realized just how much joy he brought into our lives until I sat down and started talking about him like this. Because when you're living inside motherhood every day, you don't always stop and see it while it's happening. But looking back now, I can see it so clearly. The loud footsteps, the stories, the imagination, the chaos, the laughter, the energy, the way he made ordinary moments feel unforgettable. And I think what I'll always love most about Carson is that he reminds people to live a little lighter, to laugh a little more, to not take everything so seriously. I think that's something this world needs more of. So Carson, if you ever listen to this episode, I hope you know how loved you are. I hope you know how much joy you brought into our family. And I hope someday you fully see what everybody else has always seen in you, that you were never meant to blend in. You were born to stand out. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of Mama Drama and Trauma. This whole series about my boys has meant so much to me because it's reminded me that even through heartbreak, divorce, change, and all the hard seasons, there was still so much love inside our home. There was still laughter, there was still life, and there was still joy. And Carson was such a big part of that. As always, you are strong, you are worthy, and your story matters. Until next time, take care of you.